Number 1. Our first stop is in Charlotte, Michigan. We're at the Eaton County Courthouse for the sentencing of Larry Nassar for repeatedly sexually assaulting at least 265 young women and girls under the guise of medical treatment. Randall Margraves, a father of 3 victims, had a couple of things to let off his chest.
I would ask you to, as part of this sentencing, to grant me 5 minutes in a locked room with this demon. Would you do that?
That is not how
yes or no?
No, sir, I can't.
Would you give me 1 minute?
You know that I can't do that. That's not how our legal system works.
With all that suppressed anger, Randall Margraves lunges out of the blue into the defendant and is swiftly tackled and brought down by court officers. As for Larry Nassar, he was sentenced to 40 to 175 years in prison for various sexual abuse charges, to be served after a separate 60-year sentence for child pornography. That means he'll serve at least 100 years in prison, effectively a life sentence. Number 2. Following that, a 28-year-old former South Florida swim teacher was convicted guilty of assaulting 3 6-year-old girls at the Broward County Courthouse. Francisco de Aragorn was accused with sexual battery on a kid, as well as indecent and lascivious molestation. All 3 victims spoke in court, with one of them claiming, quote, "The lifeguard touched my private part day." Aragorn vehemently disputed the charges and stated that he had no idea why he was there. The discredited teacher stated that there may have been an unintentional contact when teaching them how to float that was misconstrued.
The facts in this case show innocence, not guilty. Not that I'm some monster. Not that I'm some sort of molester, some secret pedophile.
The defendant refused a plea agreement that would have resulted in a 25-year jail sentence and instead received 4 life sentences. Number 3. Next up is the arraignment of 23-year-old Christopher Branham, who is facing charges for sexually exposing himself and assaulting a young boy in a San Antonio movie theater restroom. The child, his parents, and 4 siblings were watching a movie when he returned from the restroom and told his mother about the incident, which a prosecutor described as a parent's worst nightmare.
He is just a sexual predator, Your Honor. He has poor impulse control. He uses drugs, he uses alcohol.
Before getting sentenced, the defender had this to say.
I'd just like to say I'm very sorry. If I could take it back, I would.
Branham pled no guilty to sexual assault charges as part of a plea arrangement that called for a possible sentence of 35 years in jail. His hairdresser is likely to receive at least 15 years. Number 4. Christopher Elwell, 29, appears in Stratford Superior Court for his sentence. He's been charged with aggravated felonious sexual assault on a 4-year-old girl in a Mineral Park house. The victim went to Elwell's house, where a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old were also there. According to the prosecutor, the girls recounted his showing them recordings of sexual activities identical to those performed by the victim. Elwell first rejected the claims, but eventually conceded they were accurate. Elwell also pleaded guilty to failing to register as a sex offender, having already been convicted on a related crime in 2008.
The defendant was required to register as a sex offender and had been living at 12 Mineral Park Drive off and on, but more than 5 times a month, and had not changed his registration with the Somersworth Police Department.
Something weird happened shortly after he was condemned. As he sat down on the bench, another inmate stood up and headbutted him, demonstrating his contempt for sex offenders. Elwell was arrested and sentenced to 7 to 15 years in jail. Number 5. We've arrived in DeLand, Florida, to investigate a horrifying and stomach-turning case. Edwin Wren, 19, was accused with raping a 9-month-old infant. The newborn suffered so serious injuries that she required reconstructive surgery. Wren lived with the infant's parents, who occasionally left him to care for the newborn. On that fatal day, he claimed to have heard voices urging him to harm the infant and passed out while doing so.
I was sitting on the couch about to watch a movie, and I heard a voice in my head telling me to do something too.
Wren, according to investigators, made measures to conceal the crime and get an alibi, and the doctors who examined him testified that he is not insane. Wren was promptly condemned to life in jail without the possibility of release and was labeled a sexual predator. Number 6. We're in the Franklin County Courthouse for the trial of Terry McFadden, 70, for sexually abusing 2 children at his wife's daycare. The girls were 4 and 6 years old when they were in Terry McFadden's care. He was arrested after Franklin County Children's Services received a report of possible inappropriate sexual contact. Before the judge sentenced him, she gave him an emotional speech.
You can't even know what damages you've done for sexual gratification. This, to me, is so mind-boggling that you used and abused 2 little children like they're They're inconsequential.
The judge condemns him to 22 years in jail with a look of remorse on his face, but let's be honest, he certainly deserves more. Number 7. We're in Miami, Florida, for this resentencing hearing of 24-year-old Ronnie Salazar, who was charged 10 years ago with sexual assault and first-degree murder of his 11-year-old sister. Salazar was initially sentenced to life imprisonment, but the state of Florida recently banned life sentencing for juvenile killers. Now he's here hoping to get a lighter sentence. The judge acknowledged Salazar's troubled past, poverty, and parental neglect, something Salazar spoke about himself.
They wouldn't tell me the reason why they left me. I broke down and I told them what happened. Everything. That I wasn't going to bring Stephanie back.
The judge sentenced him to 40 years in jail with a 25-year review period. Salazar burst into tears during the sentence, a sign of a man filled with guilt. Number 8. We return to Florida, where Lewis Matthews, a Tampa resident, has been charged with sexual battery on a kid under the age of 12, tampering with physical evidence, and 2 felony charges of lewd or less violent molestation of a juvenile under the age of 12. The 10-year-old told the prosecutor about falling asleep on the living room floor while visiting her mother's lover. She said Matthews woke her up about 3:30 a.m., undressed her, and abused her. Fortunately, he was cut off when her mother heard noises downstairs and dialed 911 immediately. Lewis Matthews was seen smiling with his attorney as they left. If I had been just sentenced to life in prison, it would have been impossible for me to even grin. Matthews promptly kidnapped the girl and drove her to a nearby gas station, where he told her to strip naked and drenched her with bleach in an attempt to eliminate his DNA.
Is there anything you wish to say?
No, man, I thank you for your time and everything.
Number 9. Michael Peach was arraigned in a Trumbull County courthouse following his conviction on 18 crimes, including gross sexual imposition, abduction, and felonious assault. Peach worked as a supervisor at the victim's mother's medical billing firm. He sexually molested the youngster and videotaped the event after utilizing his position to become acquainted with the victim. He had this to say about himself.
I can only pray for forgiveness and, that I alone, no matter what sentence I get, I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my life anyway. It's something I'll never forget. And, if I could take it back, obviously I would. Unfortunately, I can't.
Trumbull County Judge Ronald Rice described him as a monster, classic pedophile, and predator, and sentenced him to 48 years in jail. Number 10. We are in Columbia County Court, where John Ackland, 56, is accused of sexually abusing 2 children on 16 counts. Ackland maintained the same expression throughout the trial, from the prosecutor's case through the impact statement to the actual sentence.
And I hope that you never see the light of day again. I hope that you're never going to be around any children. I hope that you just spend the rest of your life there and you're never let out, because you're a danger to children in this society.
The judge sentenced him to 335 years in state prison after imposing the maximum term on each offense.